Chapter 45. Turning from the Temple Gate as soon as I read the warning, I made the best of my way to Fleet Street, and there got a late hackney chariot and drove to the Hummums in Covent Garden. The Hummums were a kind of commercial hotel. In those times, a bed was always to be got there at any hour of the night, and the chamberlain, letting me in at his lonely wicket, lighted the candle next in order on his shelf, and showed me straight into the bedroom next in order on his list. It was a sort of vault on the ground floor at the back, with a despotic monster of a four-poster bed inside it, straddling over the whole place, putting one of its arbitrary legs into the fireplace and another into the doorway, and squeezing the wretched little washstand in a quite divinely righteous manner. As I had asked for a night light, the chamberlain brought me in the old constitutional rushlight of those virtuous days, an object like the ghost of a walking cane, which instantly broke its back if it were touched, which nothing could ever be lighted at, and which was placed in solitary confinement at the bottom of a high tin tower, perforated with round holes that made staringly wide-awake patterns on the walls. When I got into bed and lay there footsore, weary and wretched, I found I could not close my eyes, and thus, in the gloom and the death of the night, I stared at the patterns on the walls. What a doleful night! How anxious, how dismal, how long! There was an inhospitable smell in the room of cold soot and hot dust, and as I looked into the corners, especially at the canopy above my head, I thought what a number of blue-bottle flies from the butchers and earwigs from the markets and grubs from the country must be holding up there, laying by for the next summer. This led me to speculate whether any of them ever tumbled down, and I fancied I felt light falls upon my face, a disagreeable turn of thought suggesting other and more objectionable approaches up my back. When I had lain a little while, those extraordinary voices with which silence teems began to make themselves audible. The closet whispered, the fireplace sighed, the little washstand ticked, and one guitar string played occasionally inside the chest of drawers. At about the same time, the eyes of the wall acquired a new expression, and in every one of those staring rounds I saw written, "Don't go home." Whatever light fancies and night noises crowded upon me, they never warded off this "Don't go home." It planted itself into whatever thought as if a bodily pain would have done. Not long before, I had read in the newspapers how a gentleman unknown had come to the Hummums in the night and had gone to bed and destroyed himself and been found in the morning weltering in blood. It came into my head that he must have occupied this very vault of mine, and I got out of bed to assure myself that there were no red marks about. Then I opened the door to look down the passages and cheer myself with the companionship of a distant light, near which I knew the chamberlain was dozing. But all this time, why was I not to go home? And what happened at home, and when I should go home, and whether Provis was safe at home, were questions occupying my mind so busily that one might have supposed there could have been no room for any other. Even when I thought of Estella and how we had parted that day forever, and when I recalled all the circumstances of our parting, and all her looks and tones and the action of her fingers while she knitted, even while I was pursuing here and there and everywhere, the caution, "Don't go home," never left me. When I at last dozed in sheer exhaustion of mind and body, it became a vast shadowy verb, which I had to conjugate, Imperative mood, present tense. Do not thou go home. Let him not go home. Let us not go home. Do not ye or you go home. Let them not go home. Thus, potentially, I may not and I cannot go home. I might not, could not, would not, should not go home, until I felt I was being distracted and rolled over on the pillow and looked at the staring rounds on the wall again. I had left directions that I was to be called at 7, for it was plain that I must see Wemmick before seeing anybody else, and equally plain that this was a case in which his Walworth sentiments only could be taken. It was a relief to me getting out of the room when the night had been so miserable, and I needed no second knocking at the door to startle me from my uneasy bed. The castle battlements arose upon my view at 8 o'clock. The little servant, happening to be entrusting her wares into the fortress at the same time, was carrying 2 hot rolls. I passed through the postern and crossed the drawbridge in her company, and so came without announcement into the presence of Wemmick as he was making tea for himself and the aged. An open door afforded a perspective view of the aged in bed.
"Hello, Mr. Pip," said Wemmick. "You did come home, then?"
"Yes," I returned, "but I didn't go home."
"That's right," said he, rubbing his hands. "I left a note for you at each of the temple gates on the chance. Which gate did you come in by?"
I told him.
"I'll go round to the others in the course of the day and destroy the notes," said Wemmick. "It's a good rule never to have documentary evidence left if you can help it, because you don't know when it may be put in. I'm going to take a liberty with you. Would you mind toasting this sausage for the aged P?"
I said I should be delighted to do it.
"Then you can go about your work, Mary Ann," said Wemmick to the little servant girl. "Which leaves us to ourselves, don't it, Mr. Pip?" he added, winking as she disappeared. I thanked him for his friendship and caution, and our discourse proceeded in a low tone while I toasted the aged's sausage and he buttered the crumb for the aged's roll. "Now, Mr. Pip, you know," said Wemmick, "you and I understand one another. We are in our private and personal capacities, and we have been engaged in a confidential transaction before today. Official sentiments are one thing. We are extra-official." I cordially assented. I was so very nervous that I had already lighted the aged's sausage like a torch, and had been obliged to blow it out. "I accidentally heard yesterday morning," said Wemmick, "being in a certain place where I once took you. Even between you and me, it's as well not to mention names when avoidable."
"Much better not," said I. "I understand you."
"I heard there by chance yesterday morning," said Wemmick, "that a certain person, not altogether of uncolonial pursuits and not unpossessed of a portable property, I don't know who it may really be, we won't name this person."
"Not necessary," said I.
Had made some little stir in a certain part of the world where a good many people go, not always in gratification of their own inclinations, and not quite irrespective of the government's expense.
I was watching his face. I made quite a firework of the aged sausage, and greatly discomposed by my own attention and Wemmick's, for which I apologized.
"By disappearing from the place and being no more heard of thereabouts, from which," said Wemmick, "conjectures had been raised and theories formed. I also heard that you at your chambers in Garden Temple, you had been watched, and might be watched again."
"By whom?" said I.
"Oh, I wouldn't go into that," said Wemmick evasively. "It might clash with the official responsibilities. I heard it as I haven't heard in my time other curious things in the same place. I don't tell it to you on information received. I heard it. He took the toasting fork and sausage from me as he spoke, and set forth the aged's breakfast neatly on a little tray. Previous to placing it before him, he went into the aged's room with a clean white cloth, and tied the same under the old gentleman's chin, and propped him up, and put his nightcap on one side, which gave him quite a rakish air. Then he placed his breakfast before him with great care, and said, "All right, ain't you, Aged P?" To which the angel, the cheerful aged, replied, "All right, John, my boy, all right." As there seemed to be a tacit understanding that the aged was not in a presentable state and was therefore to be considered invisible, I made a pretence of being in complete ignorance of these proceedings. This watching me out of my chambers, which I once had reason to suspect, I said to Wemmick when he came back, is inseparable from the person to whom you have averred, is it? Wemmick looked very serious. "I couldn't undertake to say that, of my own knowledge, I mean. I couldn't undertake that to say that. Oh, no. But it is either, or will be, or is in great danger of being." As I saw that he was restrained by fealty to Little Britain from saying as much as he could, and as I knew with thankfulness to him how far out of his way he had gone to say what he did, I could not press him. But I told him, after a little meditation over the fire, that I would like to ask him a question, subject to his answering or not answering, as he deemed right, and sure that his course would be right. He paused in his breakfast, and crossing his arms and pinching his shirt sleeves, his notion of indoor comfort being to sit without any coat, he nodded to me at once to put my question. "You have heard of a man of bad character whose name is Compeyson?" He answered with another nod. "Is he living?" One more nod. "Is he in London?" He gave me one more nod, compressed the post office mouth exceedingly, gave me one last nod, and went on with his breakfast. "Now," said Wemmick, "questioning over," which he emphasized and repeated for my guidance, "I come to what I did after hearing what I heard. I went to Garden Court to find you. Not finding you, I went to Claricus to find Mr. Herbert." "And you found him?" said I with great anxiety. "And him I found. Without mentioning any names or going into any details, I gave him to understand that if he were to take care of anybody, Tom, Dick, or Richard, and find them about in the chambers or about in the immediate neighbourhood, you were to get Tom, Jack, or Richard out of the way while you were out of the way." He was greatly puzzled by what to do. "Oh, certainly he was puzzled, not the less, because I gave him my opinion that it was not safe to try to get Tom, Dick, or Richard too far out of the way at present. Mr. Pip, I'll tell you something. Under existing circumstances, there is no place like a great city when you can hide in it. Don't break cover too soon. Lie close. Wait things slacken before you try to go into the open, even for breaking air." I thanked him for his valuable advice, and asked him what Herbert had done. "Mr. Herbert," said Wemmick, "after being all of a heap for half an hour, set out with a plan. He mentioned me as a secret that he is going to court a young lady who has, as no doubt you are aware, a bedridden pa." which Pa, having been in the purser's line of life, likes to lie in a bed by a bow window, where he looks up and down the river to see the ships going up and down the river. You are acquainted with this lady? Almost certainly? Not personally, said I. The truth was that she had objected to me as an expensive companion who did Herbert no good, and that when Herbert first proposed to present me to her, she had received the proposal with such very moderate warmth that Herbert had felt himself obliged to confine the state of the case to me, with a view to the lapse or little time before I could make her acquaintance. When I had begun to advance Herbert's prospects by stealth, I had been able to bear with this with cheerful philosophy. He and his affianced, for their part, had naturally not been very anxious to produce a third person into their interviews, and thus, though I was right, I was assured that I had risen in Clara's esteem, and although the young lady and I had been rarely passing messages from one to the other by a region of Herbert, I had never seen her. However, I did not trouble Wemmick with these particulars. The house with the bow window, said Wemmick, being on the river side, down by the pool there, between Limehouse and Greenwich, and being kept, it seems, by a very respectable widow who has a furnished upper floor to let, Mr. Herbert put it to me, what did I think of that as a temporary tenement for Tom, Richard, or Jack? Now, I thought of it very well, and for 3 reasons I'll give you. That is to say, first, it's altogether out of your beats, and so well away from the usual heap of streets, great and small. Second, without going near it yourself, you could always hear of the safety of Tom, Jack, or Richard through Mr. Herbert. Thirdly, after a while, and when it might be prudent, if you should want to slip Tom, Jack, or Richard on board the foreign packet boat, there he is, ready. Well, sir, Mr. Herbert threw himself into the business with a will, and by 9 o'clock last night he had housed Tom, Jack, or Richard, whichever it may be, you and I don't need to know the name, quite successfully. At the old buildings it was understood that he was summoned to Dover, and in fact he was taken down the Dover road and cornered out of it. Now, another great advantage of all this is that it was done without you. And if anyone was concerning himself about your movements, you must be known to be ever so many miles off and quite otherwise engaged. This diverts suspicion and confines it for the same reason. I recommended that even if you came back last night, you should not go home. It brings in more confusion, and you want confusion. Wemmick had finished his breakfast. Here looked at his watch and began to get his coat on. And now, Mr. Pip, said he, with his hands still in the sleeves, I've probably done the most I can do. But if I can do more, from a Walworth point of view, of course, and in strict confidence and personal enmity, I should be glad to do it. Here's the address. There can be no harm in you going there tonight and seeing for yourself that all is well with Tom, Jack, or Richard before you go home, which is another reason for your not going home last night. But after you have gone home, don't go back here. You are very welcome, of course, I'm sure, Mr. Pip. His eyes were now out of his sleeves, and I was shaking them. And let me firstly to impress one important point upon you. He laid his hands on my shoulders and added in a solemn whisper, avail yourself of this evening to lay hold on his portable property. You don't know what may happen to him. Don't let anything happen to the portable property. Quite despairing of making my mind clear to Wemmick on this point, I forbore to try. Time's up, said Wemmick. We must be off. If you had nothing else to do, and you can keep here till dark, that's what I should advise. You looked so very agitated, and it was good to have you someone quiet and strong, like the aged himself. You can stay all day with the aged. He'll be up presently, and a little bit of, you remember the pig? Of course, said I. Well, and with a little bit of him, that sausage you toasted was his, and he was in all respects a first-rater. Do try him. It's only for old acquaintance' sake. Goodbye, aged parent, in a cheery shout. All right, John, all right. Good boy, good, my boy, piped the old man from within. I soon fell asleep before Wemmick's fire, and the aged and I enjoyed one another's society by falling to sleep before it more or less all day. We had a loin of pork for dinner, greens grown on the estate, and I nodded at the aged with a good intention whenever I failed to do it drowsily. When it was quite dark, I left the aged preparing the fire for toast, and I inferred from the number of teacups, as well as from his glances at the two little doors on the wall, that Miss Skiffins was expected.